All right, so kosher pigskin, another episode. Like you can probably tell by now in English, but you can probably also tell that Ya'kov is not here. He's vacationing in Italy, but I'll have to do the heavy lifting for now. And we have, for the second consecutive week, a fantasy football episode with another very special guest that I'm pretty delighted to have. We've got Derek Brown with us from Fantasy Pros. For those of you who don't know, Fantasy Pros is a very popular, very highly regarded site about fantasy, and Derek is one of the featured analysts on it. And they agreed to join us for 45, 50 minutes or an hour to chat about everything fantasy football related towards the draft and the whole season in general. So, Derek, thanks for joining me today. What's going on?
Oren, thanks for having me, man. This is fantastic. I'm so glad that you reached out on social media and stuff. We're able to link up and do this episode, man. And shout out to your co-host. Can't we all just be, vacationing in Italy this week? I mean, that sounds so amazing right now. So shout out to him.
Listen, I can't complain because I'm going to Greece next week, so I can't complain too
Oh
much.
well,
But I am
jeez. Yeah, I was
totally
fixing
on
to
the
say
jealousy
burying
board.
the lead
Yeah.
here, right?
Okay, yeah. When's the last time you were on vacation? Not necessarily in Europe,
Oh.
but just in general.
Um, It's been a minute. Now we have a family vacation probably next week and stuff. Going to go out of town for Father's Day and stuff, spend time with family. And I'll be out of town for about a week. That's kind of the yearly thing we do. We take a fishing trip every single summer. And really, it's kind of like my recharge before the craziness of the
Yeah.
summer and football and training camps and all that kind of stuff ramps up. So that's the time where I recharge the battery.
Oh, yeah. Where are you based, by the way?
Texas.
Texas. Okay, so where do Texans go to vacation usually? Where do they go fishing?
Usually somewhere on the Gulf Coast, somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico. We have family
Sounds
that
good.
has, yeah, we have family that has like a fishing camp down there in South Louisiana. I'm actually from Louisiana and stuff. So, but a lot of Texans just really the aim, and I mean, you can tell me if it's hot as hell over there already, but like, look, it gets up into the hundreds, the one teens. So really, the aim for anybody living in Texas is to just go somewhere else where either there's water or it's not as hot. So it's a low bar for vacationing here.
But still, Gulf of Mexico sounds pretty good. All right, so
It's
actually, we're
pretty nice.
talking about how I reached out, which is interesting because I saw you were available for having chats about fantasy. So I
Hmm.
responded to one of your tweets, then I responded again, and then you were like, "Okay, let's do it." And I tried to DM you, but I saw that I couldn't. So I actually thought it was some issue on my side, and I actually registered to X Premium for the first time ever because I thought that's the issue. And then you told me that you closed your DMs because of some. You said death threat. Something was it fantasy related to death threats? I mean, did it go that far? But was it?
Yeah, unfortunately, some people go that far. When I started writing for Fantasy Pros over 2 years ago, I think it's like what 3 years now, um, and really started writing the primer and stuff like that. Yeah, I still have my DMs open, and people were able to still reach out, and
Mhm.
I never experienced stuff like that. And then I got a lot of hateful DMs, just people saying a lot of hateful shit, and
Was
between
it
that
was it
and some
about
actual.
like was it
Mhm.
about like an allegedly bad tip? Like what was the context of the
I mean, it's
threats?
stuff that was generalized, and it's sad to say that it was more than one, but stuff is generalized as saying like, look, like, I'm gonna drive to Texas and hurt
Wow.
you, or I will, or the other things just miscellaneously as horrible as considering the stuff you told me last year before the football season, you should just go kill yourself. Like a lot of just
Wow.
stuff of that nature. And I won't say it was like heaping and tons of volume, but like you get a few messages like that, and you're just like, okay, I'm done. Like I'm closing the DMs. Like
Yeah, yeah.
you have to put up those, especially in today's social media climate. Like you have to put up those walls where it's like, look, like, no, like there has to be some type of separation, whether it's for your own safety, your own mental health, more of like,
Yeah.
you have to guard yourself. You know, it's like social media is great in a lot of different facets, but it also can be very intrusive in a lot of others.
Yeah, man, I'm sorry you had to go through it, but I'm actually a ghost commission like 5 leagues this year on Sleeper, which you're featured on, Fantasy Pros, and we have like 2 rookie leagues. And I told people like, listen, you're gonna go through the entire range of human emotion to the extreme, but that's like insane that it goes that far for certain people. So again, I'm sorry you had to go through it, and I hope people can find some perspective in their lives. I mean, obviously these are pretty troubled people.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's like, look, like I know we all have our own struggles and we're all dealing with certain things, and everybody's got a lot of stuff going on in their lives and stuff. But it's like, if the knee jerk is you need to reach out and sling words of that manner at somebody, then like, come on, like you need to look in the mirror. Like, it's not that serious. Like there's certain steps maybe you need to take in your own life, and for that, look, is what it is. A lot of people have a lot worse things to deal with in life on a daily basis, so I won't gripe too much.
Yeah, 100%. So I'd love to hear some background about you personally, how you got into fantasy football, and about Fantasy Pros. I know you guys have a ton of very cool data. You've got a bunch of products. Some are free, premium data that you just released in a bunch, like over the past week or so, actually. So I'd love to hear about that a little more.
Yeah, so my background, I've been full-time in the content space for about 5 years. I've been writing in totality for probably about 8 years. And before all of that, I was actually in the healthcare community. I was a registered nurse. I worked for St. Jude's, and I did pediatric oncology for over 12 plus years before getting into being a writer. And
Amazing.
it's really something that grew from being a hobby to now it's my full-time job. Like, I still have my nursing license, and that still is kind of floating out there somewhere. But now this is my full-time job and what I do on the daily basis. So it's really been a blessing. To be honest, something that I never thought was actually going to be a reality.
And it started with like a personal blog. Like, how did it start, that shift? How did it begin?
So I started with a smaller site called Fantasy Football 24/7. Got on started with them. That grew into writing opportunities for other places. Fantasy Pros being one of them back in the day. I used to write free articles and things like that, or just tossing group stuff, which we still do, featured pros and group articles even now. So really it's been a long winding road of a lot of different websites, a lot of different opportunities, and spots where I did stuff for free, for minimal pay, and things where it's just kind of one of those things, like you take the first step and you keep kind of walking down the path, and things kind of snowball sometimes.
Yeah, I can definitely identify. I'm making some shifts of my own right now over the past year or so. So this conversation is a part of it. I actually still work part-time in tech as a product manager, but I said I used to work full-time, and I said, all right, I need to give some time for myself and my family. So this conversation and everything around, like the community that I'm building and the writing, is a part of it. And right now it's just giving a ton of myself. You get a lot of stuff back, not financially, but you get a ton back. So I can identify.
So if you love it and you're going to put the time and the effort into it, and like what you're building right here, Oren, like it's awesome, so the money isn't there a lot of times, like at the very beginning of it, but if you keep putting in the time and the effort and like what you're building right now, look, passion equals, passion and hard work equals the fruits of that labor. So like eventually that's going to come, man. You just got to keep pushing.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it, and hopefully you're right about this. So what do people need to know about Fantasy Pros in case they're not familiar with the site? Like, what are like the best highlights of resources that people should check out if they prepare for the draft right now?
I mean, the first thing I got to bring up, I could talk to you and start this entire conversation about like the mountain of content we have and our redraft kit being live and stuff like that. But I think really the 101 of this conversation and how this should start is the tools on the site. The tools that we have in our tool suite at Fantasy Pros is second to none. Like, we have the best tools in the entire fantasy industry. And whether that is, you know, you're talking about our draft wizard software, you're talking about our league management tools and stuff to how to manage your teams. I mean, we make it so freaking easy for people to play in so many leagues, and whether that's finding trades, waivers, managing your teams, and just knowing where you're at, or waiver wire exposure, everything. It makes it to where it's, if you got into fantasy and you said, okay, I got into 1 or 2 leagues and I wanted to get into more, but you're like, man, I really don't know if I have the time to do all of that, but I can't stop saying yes to people. Like, people ask and I just join another league and I join another league. And you're like, oh my God, I wake up and I have 10 leagues. That is what Fantasy Pros is here for, man. Like, our tools are amazing, and it makes so much of the league management and how to win your leagues so freaking easy that, like, it just, I mean, the tools basically sell themselves. Like, if people go and try them, I don't really have to even do a sales pitch. If you go try the tools, tell me where I'm wrong. Hit me up on X, at me. I don't care, because I promise people if they go try them, they're going to love them.
So, yeah, guys, if you're listening, you just heard that Derek just dared you to not love the Fantasy Pros tool, so you should definitely go check it out. Personally, I just started, checking stuff out as research for this conversation, and I won't say it's overwhelming, because you would say that would suggest it's too much, but it's crazy how much stuff you've got in there. It's crazy to think how the industry and the technology changed compared to 15 years ago when I just started playing fantasy. It's pretty amazing, and it's so much more fun and easy right now to be a fantasy rookie or just a fantasy player in general.
Oh, absolutely. The thing that people don't know, and not to cut you off, Orrin, but like the thing that people don't know about Fantasy Pros is, as big as our content team is, our dev team covering the back end that is constantly updating things, improving the site with our tools, like, where we're trying not just to invent the wheel, we're trying to add spinners. We're trying to sit here and make it even better. It's prettier, it's more user-friendly, and it's just sexy as hell. Like, that dev team is huge, man. So the back end of our company and the people that don't get the light of day, like that aren't forward-facing like myself, like they deserve all that credit, man, because what they've built and what they continue to build is fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. Like I told you, I'm still part-time product manager, so I can definitely appreciate the work that's being done on the product side, the user interface, and all the work that you just mentioned. I can definitely relate to what you're saying. Okay, so there's so much to cover, and I've got some listener questions and stuff. Let's just start diving into some names and positions and stuff like that.
Sounds good.
And I'd like to start with an article you recently published that's titled Draft Targets. Mm-hmm. And obviously, I don't want to give too much away, but I think the cover photo of it is Jackson Smith and Jigba. Mm-hmm. So if you can touch on, like, when you're trying to find a sleeper or a player that you would predict is going to overachieve his ADP, how do you make these calculations behind it, and how do you identify Jackson Smith and Jigba, or you can give me, I don't know, one more example.
Yeah, so my process with it is looking at a variety of different things, and I know they can kind of lead us down a long rabbit hole, but it's a mix of looking at volume, looking at how offenses could change or could run, player usage, efficiency metrics that I care about where players pop, and maybe they didn't pay off because of injuries or the offensive complexion and how that all looked last year. And you're projecting these things forward. That's how I'm kind of like dicing up every single player, and I'm looking at, like, what is the range of what they could be or who they are, or maybe we were wrong. Maybe this player, like, and JSN is a perfect example of this, is maybe we were wrong in saying, oh, his rookie season was terrible. It was just garbage. Like, it was not what we all hoped. But if you look at the deeper metrics and his usage profile last year, it screams that he was used in a terrible role. Like, they should have never deployed him the way that they did. I mean,
especially early on. I was watching the games, especially early on. It was like a yard beyond the line of scrimmage at max. And then the stats that I saw you 100%, it was insane.
It's insane, man. Like, they neutered a route running savant, a guy that came out of college, and we were all talking about, okay, what is his testing? Is he going to be an okay athlete? Is he going to be an upper echelon athlete? Like, he's not a quick twitch, like the kind of guy where you're going to put the ball in his hands and expect him to go out there and break like 7 tackles on a freaking screenplay. But that's exactly what Shane Waldron did last year. They neutered him into a screen merchant. Like, JSN had the 7th highest screen target rate and the 7th most screen targets last year. And that should have never been a role for a player of his talent and his profile, like his archetype. Like, if you look at the other numbers about him, and the reason why I'm so high on him is when they aligned him on the perimeter, we're talking about a wide receiver that was 15th in yards per route run and 4th in target rate per route run. Like, those metrics matter. And it's like, when he wasn't being used in these, like, and to your point, Oren, when he was used on these screens, his ADOT, his average depth of target, was minus 2.9 yards behind the freaking line of scrimmage. Like,
I'm not shocked by it.
How is he supposed to sit here and get 8, 9, 10, 12 yards? Like, after the catch? It was a bad role, man. And I think we see a different role for him to operate in this year. Is he going to play in the slot? Sure. Is he going to get targets religiously behind the line of scrimmage? No, I don't think that's going to happen. So as long as we're projecting that role forward and being honest with ourselves of who he could be, who he was when he wasn't asked to just get a bunch of dump-offs last year, yes, JSN is going to take off this year. So I'm massively in on him, man.
Yeah, I mean, you make a very compelling case. I'm going to be brutally honest here. I'm not the big stats guy in fantasy. I'm usually looking at a situation and I'm thinking, okay, so for example, for JSN, he's got in his wide receiver room, he's got DK Metcalf and he's got Tyler Lockett. And you don't have a QB that's going to throw it most likely 40 times a game, I'm assuming, right? So in this context, how would you try to convince someone who's worried about JSN for this reasoning that they should still go ahead and try to get him? Like, how do you know that Tyler Lockett for this year is going to start fading out, which people thought it's going to happen last year, but it didn't? How would you answer to that kind of doubt around JSN?
So what I'll say about Tyler Lockett, I think Tyler Lockett can still be a good player, but we have to be honest with ourselves about who Tyler Lockett is as well. And the thing about Tyler Lockett is, has he outperformed, gotten past the age curve? Because he's still a player. Like, right now, Tyler Lockett is 31 years old. So when does that age curve, like, or that cliff happen for him? And I think we've already seen the beginnings of the decline. Like, if you look at Tyler Lockett, and I had to pull this up just to make sure I'm not just spouting stuff off the top of my head. His yards per route run, looking at those efficiency metrics again, his yards per route run, which is a stat that I go to constantly, just whether we want to talk about productivity or efficiency and how good a player is, specifically a wide receiver is, on a per play basis. His yards per route run has dropped in each of the last 3 seasons, and it dropped off a cliff last year. So the way that Seattle has composed their offense over the last 2-3 years is, and this is a lot of different teams, so this is not just a Seattle-centric take, but a lot of teams, when they face certain coverage types, they have a guy that they kind of go to. It's like, okay, we play single high safety teams, and they're going to drop one guy deep, and how are we going to attack that? DK Metcalf has been the guy that they use to attack single high coverages versus 2 high coverages with 2 safeties deep. Tyler Lockett has been the go-to for Seattle versus those coverage types. I think JSN takes over that Tyler Lockett role versus too high this year, and he becomes that go-to. And to your point about the volume, I'm going to push back on that ever so slightly because I don't think that we're giving Seattle enough credit for the passing volume we could see, because their offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, last year in college at Washington led a collegiate offense that was 12th in pass attempts per game, 9th in passing rate. So I think we could see a Seattle offense that, while everything's kind of coming out and they're telling everybody, oh, we're going to run the ball. Well, yeah, you're going to run the ball. Nobody's saying that you're not going to run the freaking ball. And everybody says they're going to run the ball because, oh, they have a head coach that is defensive-minded as well.
Yeah.
Their OC last year in college was pass happy, pass happy, pass happy. So we could see an offense that's going to infuse more passing volume than anybody's giving it credit. So I will push back on the volume narrative because that could surprise. And if JSN distances himself from an aging Tyler Lockett a little bit more and his role changes like I think it's going to change, then he's going to be uber productive.
Yeah, so you talked about an aging Tyler Lockett. That's a perfect segue to the players to avoid list that you have. And you know who else is 31 years old? That's Davante Adams.
Mm-hmm.
But for the second week in a row, I'm talking to a guy who's very, very bearish, I would say, on Davante Adams. So I'm assuming part of it is the age curve, but do you have any more reasoning behind it?
So I don't understand why we are drafting and ranking Davante Adams where we are, in the sense that right now,
the ADP right now is, what's the ADP right now? About
is ADP, so on numerous best ball sites, and that's usually the ADP that I think is the most relevant at this time of the year because it's the sharpest. Like, people are actually drafting, putting money behind it and stuff like that. The ADP for him in Underdog Best Ball drafts is wide receiver 10. In our ECR rankings on Fantasy Pros, he's wide receiver 9. And that's where I don't understand it. Or I'm like, he's a top 10 wide receiver ranked and being drafted, and it's just like, we're just excusing and pretending like last year didn't happen when he was the wide receiver 15 in fantasy points per game. Like, he didn't even pay off this ADP last year. Like, why? So it's like, I don't hate Davante Adams. I want to get that out of the way. But I don't understand how we can draft a wide receiver that showed us in that offense with the quarterback play, which that didn't change this year.
Not dramatic.
It's going to be Gardner Minshew or Aiden freaking O'Connell throwing in the ball this year. They are both collectively not great. Yeah. And we're drafting Davante Adams as a wide receiver 1 in all formats when he put up wide receiver 2 numbers last year. And do we think that the volume goes up for Adams? Because last year he produced as a wide receiver 2. This is a wide receiver we're talking about that was second in raw target volume and second in target share. So, like, the volume doesn't have any way to really go up from what we saw last year. So you're drafting him as a wide receiver 1. He produced as a wide receiver 2. The quarterback play didn't change, isn't changing. Yeah. And yet people are just like, he's going to go back to being a wide receiver 1. Like, what do you know? Like, no, Andy's a year older. Like, what about this entire math equation makes any sense? That's where it's like, and I put this in my players to avoid article. I literally said, don't hate the player, hate the ADP. The ADP, I can't make any sense out of it. So I'm not drafting Davante Adams at that price point at all.
Yeah, so there are a couple more names. I mean, Josh Jacobs, I heard people, shitting all over him for a while now. So I think the point is really...
Well, I'm part of that crew. That's definite.
Yeah, for sure. But a name that actually surprised me, maybe it's a typo, I don't know. Does it say Josh Allen?
You're gonna say Josh Allen, Archie? Yeah. So, okay. So I knew as soon as I put this in the article, I knew people were gonna hate it. Okay, but this is another case, right? Of
Derek. That's clickbait.
Huh? No, it's right? Not. It's not. It's really not. Right. It's not.
All right.
It's not.
All right.
But here's the thing. If I were to told you last year, okay, so let's just throw out a case scenario here, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that this is definitively going to be exactly how Josh Allen's season goes. But if I were to tell you, Oren, last year that Patrick Mahomes, of all people, would finish barely as a QB1, you would have said, going into last year, okay, Patrick Mahomes coming off of QB1, 6, QB2, QB5, QB2 type of seasons.
Me personally, I was low on Mahomes. I was low.
I know, but if anybody, if you yourself would have said last year, okay, Patrick Mahomes is going to finish as the QB10 in fantasy, everybody would have said, you're insane. That's clickbait. That's insanity.
Yeah.
And what I come down on with Josh Allen is this is not clickbait, and I don't think Josh Allen is going to be terrible, but where he's going in drafts, he's a freaking second round pick. Like, you have to believe that Josh Allen is going to be a difference maker. He is going to separate himself at quarterback. That you can't get top 3, top 5 production later in the draft from another quarterback, a round or 2 or 3 or 4 rounds later. That can't happen. And you have to be all in on Josh Allen to draft him where he's currently going. Because he's not a 3rd round pick. He's not a 4th or a 5th round. He is a freaking 2nd round pick and being drafted around stud wide receiver 1s, other players that are going to be difference makers. And where I sit with Josh Allen is I have some worries because you look at, okay, how did he get there last year as the QB1 overall? He scored 15 freaking rushing touchdowns. Like, that is tied for the NFL record with Jalen Hurts last year.
Yeah.
So it's like, do we really think for a player that's had like 7, 8, 9 rushing touchdown seasons outside of that, pops this outlier rushing touchdown season, do we think he can really replicate that? And yes, I understand that, okay, when Joe Brady was the offensive coordinator, if you look at just those pace stats, he was on pace for 19 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but both of those numbers are astronomically insane. So, like, I have a hard time believing, does Buffalo want to run Josh Allen that much at the goal line? Is that really going to replicate year over year? I worry about that. And then you look at what happened to the offense with Joe Brady calling the shots, and it was like, okay, well, his passing attempts per game dropped from 35 to 32.7. His passing yards per game dropped from 260 to 243.7. His rushing attempt, and now his rushing numbers went up. But it's like, if he doesn't replicate, and his passing touchdowns went down. He went down from 1.9 to 1.4 passing touchdowns per game. Like, if the passing numbers don't bounce back, and what we saw out of Buffalo's offense, they became a more run-heavy team.
Yeah.
And if Josh Allen doesn't end up with this astronomical outlier rushing type of season again, he could disappoint people. And at a 2nd-round price tag, I can't pay that. Like, I just can't.
So I get your point about him being a 2nd-round pick, but how would you rank him for the position right now?
I mean, I've got him in my ranks right now. Let me pull him up. I still have him as a top 3 fantasy quarterback. Now, let me see. Where's he at? He might be my QB2 right now. But
who's one? Hurts?
Hurts is 1. Yeah, I've got Hurts at 1.
I would agree
Josh
because
Allen.
you know what? You know why? Because I think for Hurts, the 15 TDs are more sustainable because of the brotherly shove, tush push, whatever. Yep. It's just situational. Yep. And you know that's their go-to. I'm assuming Kelsey retiring is not gonna,
I don't think it's gonna change that much.
Playbook.
No.
Yeah.
And to your point though, and this is the point that I want to make about Josh Allen. People following my ranks are not going to get a lot of Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen only because of both of these guys. The price points are insane right now in ADP. Like I have Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen as my QB 1 and 2. But if you look at where ADP is and where Josh Allen, like, I have Hurts and Josh Allen snugged up as my 37th and 38th overall players. So I'm a firmly like around and some change behind where ADP is on them. So I'm saying to people, if you're drafting off my ranks, no, I don't want you taking quarterback that early. You take wide receivers, tight ends, running backs. Pick your flavor. Pick another skill position. Just don't draft quarterback that early. So it's like, I don't hate these guys, but I'm not going to pay that type of ADP on them.
But it's an interesting question or an interesting scenario. Let's say I'm following your rankings. And I have a plan. I've got a game plan. I'm going for a QB, not the first or the second tier. I'm taking one, I don't know, in the 4th or 5th round.
Okay.
But the draft has a sort of dynamic that you see the QBs starting to fall off the board earlier than expected. And it's just an example because, it's what we're talking about. But it can happen on different fronts. It can happen on the tight end. It's the dynamic of the draft. How would you treat a draft dynamic that's going completely different to what you planned out? And you start to see the players that you wanted to get in a certain round and in a certain position start to, it's starting to be very thin. And you start to feel like you're taking too many risks. And you might not be able to find like a solid QB1 that you feel comfortable with. So how would you respond to that in a live draft if that situation happens?
So I think the biggest thing when people are in live drafts is you have to be liquid. You have to be willing to maneuver through a draft. And if you see positional runs, if you see scarcity and you think, because here's the thing that people need to understand. Unless you're playing best ball, like you're playing league managed formats like redraft and stuff like that, the league and stuff doesn't stop after the draft. So I don't care if the biggest thing that I'll harp on here is go with the best players available. Because if you're drafting and you're not trying to chase a run for certain players, you're going to naturally, if you're just drafting the best players on the board, okay, you're going to naturally create pockets of value or maybe extra depth on your teams. Because the idea is that, and a lot of people look at this, especially if you're new to fantasy football and stuff, and they say, "Oh, I need to fill this position." You don't have to fill that position right now. You're drafting a team. You don't have to worry about filling that position until week 1 freaking gets here. So really what you need to be looking at is you draft the best players available. Because here's the thing. If you draft a wide receiver or you're a little bit thin at running back or tight end, but you have a lot of depth at other positions, guess what? Now you can trade from those other positions. If you are deep at a certain position and somebody's like, well, I went crazy with tight ends and running backs, I have no wide receivers. Well, guess what? I have all the wide receivers. Hi, let's make a deal. Maybe I go and we talk about a quarterback or a tight end or whatever, but you're giving yourself outs to be able to trade for your needs later. And Orrin, you know this as well as I do.
Yeah.
How many players are actually on your team by the time we get to week 17, week 18? Yeah, How many players that you actually drafted are even still on that team by the time we get there, whether that is trades or injuries or a complete, like all of the above, or waiver wire pickups? Like, you're probably going to have 2 to 3, maybe 4 cornerstone players that are absolutely crushing it for your team, that you're like, I'm not trading them. They're mine. I got it. But outside of that, the rest of your team, the draft, all the way to week 17, week 18, that's going to be filled with whether it's trades you made, waiver wire pickups, all and everything in between. Your team's going to look different. So you embrace the chaos and say, I'm not going to chase the run and get a lesser player from this draft. I'm just going to take the best player off the board, and I'm going to figure it out after the draft, whether that's trades or waiver wire or whatever.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the league is one with the trades, being able to identify trends, selling high, buying low, and so on and so on, and the waiver wire, which is, it's a part of it. So I agree 100%. Next thing I want to talk to you about is a very, very interesting Superflex draft that you did on the Fantasy Pros, and a bunch of stuff caught my eye with your specific draft. Number 1, you took Jamar Chase at 5 overall, which was a wide receiver number 2. So it was CeeDee Lamb, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar, and then you took Jamar Chase. That's number 1. Then you took, which kind of set a trend, Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. And you took a bunch more rookies later on. It was like an all-rookie draft for you, basically. It was insane. I've never seen anything like this. Let me pull up the names. I see and even the non-rookie ones were like second year. You took Will Levis, you took Dalton Kincaid, you took the bottom end here.
Jermaine Burton was on that team.
Yeah, Jermaine Burton
Jr.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you basically half the team, or even more, was rookies and second-year players. Is that a reflection of like your overall approach about taking swings on rookies or second-year players?
Yeah, I mean, look, there were also some boring veterans on that team. I also had Brian Robinson Jr. on that team. I also had Joe Mixon. I had my wide receiver room was Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, DK Metcalf, to name the top 3 guys.
Yeah.
So I do also have a mixture of veterans in there or ascending players. And really, the way that I look at these drafts and stuff is that I was willing to forego the elite quarterback at that spot. Now, if we were talking about dynasty circles, that would change. If I was in a Superflex draft and a dynasty draft, I would usually my approach in those is to go quarterback. But in a redraft setting, playing a Superflex or a 2 QB league, I feel like, can I get similar upside from a quarterback maybe in the second or the third round? And I think it's possible. And can you also mix and match quarterbacks based off of matchups, based off of how the schedule lays out to get similar type of production? Now, if you were telling me one team started with just hammer, like quarterback, both of them are rushing upside guys, they're going to be crushing, does that give you a Superflex team possibly an edge? Sure, but that cost that you're incurring with those quarterbacks, you have to nail the rest of your picks with your draft too, or you're going to need those quarterbacks to be separators to cover up other inequities in your lineup. Now, I flipped it on its head and I said, okay, I'm willing to attack upside, and the fact that you can get Jaden Daniels as a QB2 in a lot of different things, or I drafted him as my QB1 in this draft, just speaks to the fact that, like, you can get that type of rushing acumen and upside at that point of a draft, I think is a cheat code. And if I didn't think that I could get access to a rushing guy like maybe Kyler Murray drops there, maybe Jaden Daniels will drop there in most different drafts, and I think he'll be there. And so part of going into that, I was okay with foregoing the quarterback in round 1 because I felt really freaking confident that I could get Jaden Daniels as my QB1 in round 2, and Jamar Chase is my wide receiver 1 overall. And the way that we talk about it, it's like we've seen year over year a wide receiver putting up a difference maker type of season. Whether we want to talk about Cooper Kupp's legendary type of season, we want to go back to last year, we want to talk about CeeDee Lamb and what the hell he did down the stretch. Like, those types of things need to get talked about. And I look at Chase as a possible difference maker this year. And if he puts up a Cooper Kupp type of season and goes absolutely ham this year as the runaway wide receiver 1, and me taking him there was the bet that I was making on that happening, then I'm going to backfill upside at the QB position in the later rounds, like with Will Levis. I'm not really high on the player, but is there an instance in Tennessee where their passing rate way outpaces projections based off of the moves they made, what Brian Callahan has basically come out and said, as well as, I think one of the last remaining edges that we have, Oren, in drafts right now, and whether this is best ball or redraft, is we all make this case and people talk about it, but they don't want to be about it. As far as rookies are still every single year, man. We see rookies are the ones down the stretch carrying people to championships. Whether you want to talk about rookie season, Justin Jefferson. We're going to talk about Rashee Rice last year. Rookie season, Amon-Ra St. Brown. These rookies are the ones carrying people to championships. And yet when we get in these drafts, people are like, well, I don't know. I mean, should I draft rookies? I don't know. I mean, like, they're unproven, and I haven't seen it yet. And I'm like, dude, if you're waiting to see it, you're probably already late. You've waited too long. If you're waiting to see it, you're going to be left holding the bag in week 17, week 18 and saying, damn it, I wish I'd have drafted these guys. And I'm not willing to make those same mistakes. And it's the same thing year over year, man. It's like, I'm old enough to remember when people said, oh, we shouldn't be drafting Jamar Chase as high as we should in his rookie season. And he goes out and he's the wide receiver 5.
Yeah.
He was the wide receiver 5 in his rookie season. And people were like, yeah, but drafting him as a wide receiver 2 is too much. Like, I can't do that. And so I'm willing to make the bet on these players and following process. And if the numbers are saying to me, this guy is really stinking good, and if he gets more opportunity, or he gets the opportunity that I think he could get in his rookie season, or his second year, his third year, that's the bets that I'm willing to take and bet on the upside, because I don't want all these mid players. I want league-winning type of players that could put me over the top. And when week 16 and week 18 get here, I'm coasting to championships, dude.
I think like the main message here, and that's something that's being brought up in every recent conversation I've had with experts, is playing for the upside, playing to win the league.
Yes.
Not making the safe plays.
You're not playing for fourth place, dude. You're playing for first. You want the money. Like, come on.
You're either
we're gonna
first
play
or
for
you're
first.
last,
You
right?
gotta take risks.
Ricky Bobby said it. You're either first or you're last. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
For the movie
Good
fans.
Call.
Yeah. I agree. I agree 100%. And you started talking about the schedule in a different context, but there's a viewer question that kind of relates here. When you're drafting, how much emphasis are you putting on stuff? I got two stuff that's kind of side factors that sometimes people tend to put maybe too much consideration or too much weight to. Number one is schedule for the playoffs, like the later weeks. Are you looking at this? Okay, no. I get your response. You're not looking at it in any way.
And I don't mean to poo-poo that immediately, but the fact of it is
no, that's fine.
I hate. Okay, so there are certain things, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of like splits and home and road and dome and outside and things like that, there are certain actionable points to that. Like the Jared Goff playing in a shit ton of dome games this year. Yeah. Is that actionable? Yes, I think so. But when we get out over our skis and we're like, oh, this player has a rough fantasy playoff schedule right now, but the middle of summer training camps haven't even freaking started. It's like, dude, you're assuming a lot of things when we get into schedule analysis at the very back end of a season. Like, there's so many assumptions that are made with all that type of schedule analysis. It's like, okay, is that team going to be exactly who they were last year? Is that defense going to be as good as it was last year? Are there other defenses that will surprise us based off of off-season moves, or just, hell, maybe they're better than we thought they were? And the other part about that is, how the heck does anybody think they're going to know how injuries are in week 16, 17, and 18 for any of these defenses? And those things matter. Like, if you have a defense that's just like absolutely crushing passing attacks, but they're using like one or two one of the corners is shadowing and just erasing wide receiver ones, he gets hurt and the defense is bad all of a sudden. Like, how are you accounting for that in your schedule analysis? Like, you can't. So people can miss me with all that kind of stuff where it's like, well, his rushing schedule in week 16 is really rough. I don't know. I don't know if I can't draft him. Come on, man. You're making way too many freaking assumptions when you're talking about that. Like, get out of here with that. Like, that's making assumptions that you know exactly how that defense is going to be. You know what players are going to be healthy. You know whether that defense is going to be good or bad. And all I'm going to say is, I don't know those things. So you can miss me with all of that kind of stuff because I think it's honestly just bad analysis.
Yeah, so I had a sort of a Q&A on my blog, and I pretty much had the same answer. So it's really overthinking that kind of stuff.
It is. It's getting way too deep into it, and it's
any
like
strategy on buys. Do you like trying to sync the buys?
So I think that that is something that can be format specific. Like if we're talking about best ball leagues, I care about bye weeks. If we're talking about kind of like the super draft, the super flex draft that you alluded to earlier, I care about that when I'm looking at when you're drafting 2 quarterbacks and you're saying, okay, am I only drafting 2 quarterbacks? Okay, well then I don't want them to be out on the same bye week. You have to layer it like that. Or even like what I did in that draft, I drafted 3 quarterbacks, but all 3 of them had different bye weeks. Now, in those specific platforms or formats, do I care about bye weeks? Yes. In every other format, like 1 quarterback, usual PPR leagues, your standard like redraft leagues, do I give a crap about bye weeks? No, I don't care. Like all of my players can have the same freaking bye week. I don't care at all, because guess what? When week 14 gets here, I'll figure it out. Because that's the other thing. It's like, well, what if you're so worried about that and we get to week 14? We just talked about this, man, where it's like, what if half of those players aren't even on your roster anymore?
Yeah.
What if some of those guys are hurt and you already made pickups off the waiver wire and those guys aren't even starting in your lineup anymore? So it's like, I don't care about bye weeks, like overarching. I don't care about bye weeks. I care about bye weeks in 2 specific formats, whether it's Superflex or Best Ball. Outside of that, I don't give a crap about bye weeks at all.
So guys, if you're listening, I think the subtext of Derek's words is don't overthink, take the best players, figure stuff out afterwards.
Yes.
Okay, so we talked about Superflex and stuff like that. Like I told you, most of the leagues that my community is getting involved in is, the standard PPR 12-team leagues. So if I'm trying to play off the Superflex in which you took Jamar Chase, basically the second player, non-QB player, are you taking a wide receiver in round 1 in a standard PPR league? Are you liking Christian McCaffrey there? Like, what's your thought process on the first round strategy?
So it depends on where you're drafting. Depends on.
By the way, sorry to interrupt. What's your favorite pick to have in the draft order?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a
What's
good.
What's your favorite
pick? That's a good question.
Because we had a discussion about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Right now for me, I like having the 3rd overall pick, or I want to be at the turn. And the reason I like having the 3rd overall pick is I know that one of my top 3 players, either CMC, CeeDee Lamb, or Jamar Chase, is going to be there at the 3rd overall pick. A lot of it's Jamar Chase. So I love Jamar Chase. I love having the top 3 pick. I'm just going to take one of those 3 players, whoever falls there. Or I like being on the turn because I can start with 2 really stinking good wide receivers. And some of this comes down to how I'm going to attack drafts. Also depends on your starting lineup requirements. A lot of leagues play where you have to start 3 wide receivers. Some leagues will play where you only have to start 2 wide receivers. And if that's the case, and some of this also comes down to, and not to get so much into the nitty gritty here, but it matters because, so if you're playing in a league where you only have to start 2 wide receivers, maybe you have 1 flex, but again, that could be anybody, then maybe I'm more likely, depending on where I'm drafting, to go a little more running back heavy in that draft. Because I know that on a weekly basis, I'm only having to fill 2 starting wide receiver positions on a weekly basis. Yeah. So maybe I go with an elite wide receiver to be my anchor wide receiver 1, and then wide receiver 2 and the flex, I'm just figuring out those 2 spots in my lineup on a weekly basis. And that's just kind of saying, like, with the starting lineup stuff, but also looking at, because I draft when I play in even when it looks at like 12-team leagues versus 10-team leagues, I draft 10-team leagues very differently than I do a 12-team league, in the sense of I want elite players in a 10-team league. The way that you beat, because everybody in a 10-team league has all-star lineups. Like, because of the league is more condensed, better players are going to litter everybody's starting lineups. I want the best starting lineup I possibly can get and the elite of the elites. So for me, high end, like a crushing, amazing elite quarterback one and a tight end one, like I'm more likely to spend up for the elites at those positions because they're onesie positions. So I want the elites at those type. You want hammers. You want guys in 10-team leagues that just can maul the rest of your freaking league. And so for me in 10-team leagues, I'm paying up for QB1, or I'm paying up for quarterbacks and tight ends. I want to be elite at the onesie positions, as well as, and this
when
is
you
not
say
just
pay
a
up,
draft
like
thing,
how
but go ahead.
high would you go? How high would you go in the
So
10-team
I
league?
wouldn't. So the way that I would attack it, like, and this kind of go back to Josh Allen. Like, I'm probably not going to draft a Josh Allen in a 10-team league, but am I going to take the discount on maybe like a Jalen Hurts a round or two later, or Lamar Jackson, or am I going to maybe go a few picks ahead of ADP to get an Anthony Richardson? Like, I want a quarterback and a tight end in those formats where tight end one and quarterback one overall is pretty heavy in your range of outcomes, or you have a really good stinking chance of doing that. But outside of draft stuff in the 10-team leagues, I'm making 2-for-1 trades the entire year. And the thing is, I'm trying to overload my starting lineup with all the elite players that I can get, because the depth is there. Like in a 10-team league, you're going to have more players out there on the waiver wire. They're going to have better players out there on the waiver wire. So you can always kind of backfill your bench and what you need to there. So I'm just going to sacrifice the depth because I know I can access that more on the waiver wire in a 10-team league. And I want my starting lineup to just absolutely just be a soul crusher. When people face me in the app and they're like, oh my Lord, I don't know how I'm going to beat him this week.
Sounds like a plan. So I think if I'm reading you correctly, in like in a first round right now, I think you're targeting more wide receivers rather than RBs.
Yep.
You're not big on Brees Hall, Bijan right now.
So no, I mean, like right now I've got, now in my top 12 players, I've got 5 running backs inside of the top 12 players.
Oh, okay.
But I do have 7 wide receivers. And I think if you're in the middle of the round, I have Brees and Bijan as my 4th and 5th overall players. So I really, really like them. And I think it just kind of depends on where you're at in your draft.
I have
what
them
the starting
7
lineup like,
and 8. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so
cool.
inside of, inside of my top 24 players, I've got 1, 2, 3.
I got 13 RBs.
I've got, inside of my top 24 players, I've got 12 wide receivers. I've got 1 tight end. And I've got, let me see.
Who is that? Is it Laporta or Kelsey?
It's McBride, actually. Nah, McBride is my tight end one. Mm-hmm. McBride is my tight end 1 overall this year.
You got to explain that one. I mean,
I got 11 running backs inside of my top 24, so we're pretty much in. So with McBride, I just think that I think he can be this year's Travis Kelce. I think that he can be a difference maker because it's only him and Marvin Harrison Jr. in that lineup. And if you look at what he did last year, I mean, basically he did all this stuff last year, like weeks 8 through 18. He ranked first in weighted opportunity, first in target share, 4th in yards per route run. Like, he was producing as a top 3 guy last year, and nothing's changed except they added another similarly skilled player that's going to help open up the rest of the field for McBride. So I love his outlook this year, and I'm willing to make that bet. So
yeah, I ranked him 3rd, actually. I love him for this year, but one is well, you know what you're talking about, obviously. So,
well, I'm just, look, we all have to plant flags, and we have to make certain positions on players that we highly believe in for this year. McBride is one of those for me. So
that's the order for you is McBride, then Laporta and Kelsey, or is it Kelsey then Laporta?
I've got, let me see. I've got McBride as my tight end 1, Laporta is 2, Kincaid is 3, and then I got Kelsey and Andrews at 4 and 5.
Oh, Kelsey at 4.
Yeah,
So
well, I'm accounting a little bit for all of the wide receiver additions that they made this year.
yeah.
And it's not
We
that I
need to
don't
figure out
like
what's going to
Kelsey.
happen with Rashee Rice. I mean,
Yep, it's
are you
true.
seeing any way that he's getting less than 8 games up? I mean, that's what it seems to me.
I
Like,
think
it gets suspension.
I think he probably gets somewhere. So I think Rice probably gets somewhere between 4 and 6. I don't think that he
okay.
gets 8 games. I think, and then this all comes down to the NFL just does whatever the hell they want. They do
Yeah.
whatever they want with suspensions.
Wild
Like
cards. Yeah.
it's like you can get arrested, you can do all these different things, and Goodell is like, it's almost like he has like a magic die like inside of a hat. He's like, shake it up. Look, 2 games. You get 2 games. Oh,
Have you seen
get
that
3
one,
games.
the South Park episode, Margaritaville? Have you seen that one? So that's what I'm imagining with Goodell.
Yeah, dude. It's just there's no rhyme or reason with it. So like to me, with the suspension stuff, it's just like it's probably gonna be less than most people think because that's how this usually goes. And so we're all freaking out about it, and I'm not saying not to freak out about it, but again, if people are going to just absolutely avoid Rashee Rice in drafts, like I'm probably going to just be taking the under on the number of days that or games that he suspended, and if that's the case, then he's going to be a good value.
All right, makes sense. Okay, so I've prepared a lightning round. We've got some highly debated units or whatever you want to call them. Let's run by all of them, and you just tell me with a very short explanation if you're picking either one of the players. If you're picking neither, it depends on the situation. So the Titans backfield. Are you taking Spears, Pollard, or neither?
I'll take the value on Spears. Pass game upside, efficiency. Pollard, we still got to see him stay healthy, and he's got to bounce back as far as being effective as far as breaking tackles.
Yeah, the ADP is almost, it's very similar to the ADP, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Bengals backfield, Moss, Chase Brown, neither.
Neither. I want to invest in their passing attack.
Post.
Neither.
I saw that post.
Yeah, everybody's like, oh, I'm a Zach Moss stan. Oh, I love Chase Brown. And I'm like, I just like their passing attack. Y'all can go chase that back.
Zach Moss was really great last year with the Colts when Jonathan Taylor
He was. I just worry that, like, I think that was a flash in the pan because a lot of his tackle breaking stuff wasn't great. It's being held up by 1 or 2 games that were absolutely magnificent, and the rest of it was kind of meh.
Yeah. Browns backfield. Chubb, Ford. I saw you. I think you picked Ford in the Superflex.
All the Ford. All the Jerome Ford. And
yeah.
We're making all these assumptions that we see Nick Chubb this season. I don't even know if we see Nick Chubb this season. Like, I just don't know if his health is going to comply.
That injury was the worst I've seen
horrific,
in a while.
Man. Yeah. And I love Nick Chubb, the player. Like, he's been one of my favorite players to watch play football over so many years. But you're telling me that an aging running back coming off a horrific knee injury, and we just assume he's going to play enough games. Jerome Ford, as the starter last year, was a top 24 running back, but we're leaving him in the RB4 doldrums. Nah, I'm drafting all the Jerome Ford I can.
Cool. I got one more that I haven't listed in advance. Cowboys backfield. Are you taking anyone from there?
Dowdle, baby. I'll draft a lot of Rico Dowdle. I'm sorry, Zeke is going to be in the nursing home in probably like the next year or 2 or something like that. He's applying for his AARP card as we speak.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Texans wide receiver room. Are you taking? I think I got the right ADPs here. I think I took them from your database. Collins at 29, Diggs at 37, Dell at 59.
It is Collins and Dell for me. I'm actually going to drop Diggs a little bit. I think you're banking on players ascending in a second year of an offense. I think Diggs is kind of cooked, man. I think Collins and Tank Dell are going to lead them in targets.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Diggs numbers, like week 10 onwards, playoffs, obviously, it was very, very bad.
Yep.
So I can relate. I really like Devon Achane.
Ooh,
Are you in on the hype?
I'm in on the hype. I mean, really, we played this game last year, didn't we? We're like, oh, we don't know what to do with the Miami Dolphins backfield. It's like
I told people to sell Mostert high around week 6 and 8, or 6 or 8.
Sorry.
it was a mistake. But listen,
I mean, yeah, but I mean, come on. Like, how did you know he was going to stay healthy the entire year and score 20 freaking touchdowns? I mean, come on,
never happened. That never
Give yourself
happened.
some grace.
Yeah, I can live with that. I mean, he really broke every statistic.
I'm willing to sit here and get right back in the boat with Devon Achane. I mean, really, the real answer about this is I'm drafting a lot of Devon Achane. Like, the efficiency is real, and I like the player, so I'm going to draft him a good bit, especially in best ball, where I'm willing to take, again, we're taking upside shots here.
Yeah.
But the guy that I'm probably going to have the highest exposure in that entire backfield is Jalen Wright, because he's one injury away to one of those guys, or just we're wrong on the backfield, and maybe he's the guy playing Mostert role this year, and it's, you know, and Achane's role stays the same. We don't know, but he's the cheapest guy you can get in drafts right now, so I'm willing to invest in Achane where he goes. I'm going to be overweight on Jalen Wright, though.
All right, got one more name for the lightning round, Deontay Johnson. You know, it's always tricky when you're talking about the Panthers offense. But, you know, you got the new QB whisperer coach. Are you taking Deontay Johnson?
I am. He's in my top targets article. He is in my perfect draft article.
Oh, wow.
Deontay just
for which round?
Volume.
Perfect.
My perfect. He's actually in. Yeah, he's in my perfect draft article, where I walk through 75 plus players every single round of the draft. He's in that article, and he's also in my top targets article. I love Deontay Johnson. I think that we're sleeping on the volume, and Deontay has just showed us year after year after year that's what he does. He eats up volume.
Yeah. I really like Pickens, actually, for different reasons.
I like him where he goes.
Yeah. All right, one final question, which is a listener question. We got a guy in a keeper league, 12 teams, half PPR. Okay. He can either keep Brandon Ayuk for a third-round price or Rachaad White for a fifth round. Which one are you taking?
I'm taking Ayuk. I just have questions about Rachaad White. Does he reprise that same role with Canella's gone? Rachaad White lived off of volume last year. Yeah. Could he do it again this year and burn me yet again? It's possible, man. But the other thing about that is, could Deebo Samuel get traded from the 49ers and Brandon Ayuk goes from like 105 to 110 type of target guy to without Deebo there? Maybe he bumps up to 120, 130 targets, and he is a locked-in wide receiver one this year. That's equally possible. So I'm going to go with Ayuk.
All right, that pretty much wraps up everything we wanted to talk about. For me, it's been amazing. It was great talking to you.
Same.
The amount of knowledge is insane. Just a fun conversation overall, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And maybe later on, sometime during the season, I'll try to DM. No, I'm gonna DM you right now because
I was just to say, I mean, you got access now.
Access.
Like, just
I got the access right now. Yeah, so I'm gonna DM you.
I mean,
later
hit me up, man. Like, let's talk definitely during the season and stuff. I mean, put it this way: you just say when, and I'll be here.
I really appreciate it, really. So thanks again. Have fun at the Gulf of Mexico whenever that happens. And I hope you guys enjoyed the listen. I certainly did. And thanks again, Derek. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.